All right, we talked about earlier in the week, we're going to do a deep dive into reviewing the 2022 Detroit Lions season. We're going to get into all the different positions. We're going to talk about the coaches, what this season has meant to the team, the franchise, and the fan base who's been clamoring for something like this, seemingly really since the middle to maybe you could say the latter part of the 90s. So without further ado, let's dive into all these factors and maybe just a little bit more in today's Lions Talk Live. Well, greetings and salutations to everybody out there in YouTube world. I am your host once again, Dan Thornton. And I want to thank you all for tuning in for today's Lions Talk Live. We talked about it earlier in the week that we we're going to do one of these, so I wanted to not waste any more time and get into it. It is Saturday, a day normally Lions Talk Live is off the air, but with the playoffs beginning, I figured if we don't get it done now, when are we going to do it? So I want to start off by saying, hey, let's look at the end of 2021 and say, where were the Lions? Well, the Lions finished the year with a 13-1 record. Yes, we had pulled off some nice wins to end the year against both Arizona and the Green Bay Packers. But while some looked at that Packers game and said, hey, you can really see things are starting to turn around with Detroit, the naysayers, the haters, whatever you want to say, are going to point out that the Packers in that game pulled the majority of their starters at halftime. And just, the Lions went on to win. What they never did really kind of own up to the haters and say, well, Detroit was leading at the half, even with Green Bay starters out on the field. They didn't notice that. They just said, hey, but it is what it is. When you've been downtrodden as long as the Detroit Lions, people are going to come after you. But then we went into the offseason leading up to 2022. Into the 2022 offseason, there was a lot of momentum starting to build up for Detroit. There was talk about the NFL draft, who they were going to get, would they trade down, trade up, whatever it may be. There was talk centered around the group that is the Detroit Lions. You can see early signs of momentum starting to pick up. Yes, free agency had passed. We had re-signed a lot of players that we had the year before. No real big splash signings that left fans and media people questioning what was Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, and company doing with this team. And all eyes went from the free agency into the draft, and luck went our way. The Jacksonville Jaguars did not take Aiden Hutchinson, and the University of Michigan hometown hero, whatever you want to call him, came swooping in rather instantly, as you could almost see the streaks of speed racing off of people as the Detroit Lions rushed up to turn the card in to the commissioner to get out of the NFL draft out in Las Vegas. The pick for number 2, Aiden Hutchinson. And while many Lions fans were jumping up and down in joy, the idea of bringing this person into the Detroit Lions fold, we all probably felt after that pick and some of the media talking, ESPN, wherever you were watching the draft, analyzing how good a fit this was for the Detroit Lions franchise. Most people felt the Lions would have about another 2 to 3 hours until they were up again to pick at the end of the first round, whoever that was going to be. There were people speculating that last pick in the first round would be Joshua Pascal, as the Lions had clearly shown interest in him. But what did we know? Roughly 40 minutes after Hutchinson was picked, news hit the ESPN waiver wire and everybody else's. A trade had been made, and everybody was left to speculate who the Lions had just traded up to the number 12 spot to take. There was speculation about, safety from Notre Dame, Hamilton, among a ton of other people. Davis, the big defensive tackle from Georgia, was one of the speculations. But then it hit. And when it hit, it left Lions fans and national media gasping for breath, stunned that Jamison Williams, the injured, super fast, speedy wide receiver from Alabama, had been selected by the Detroit Lions in a swap of first rounders and a swap of second rounders, and all of a sudden, Lions fans started getting really excited. We're not going to break down the entire draft, but you could see just based on the first round, and then early in the second round, you saw Pascal taken, amongst other options that later on came to the Detroit Lions franchise throughout the draft. But the basis has been set. The Lions had clearly established a little bit of aggression in the first round, getting a little bit of a lady luck to go their way with Hutchinson falling to number 2. And you can see a number of other pieces that were laid out throughout the draft to build the basis of what would become the rookie class that's perhaps one of the best in Detroit Lions history had been selected in that weekend. That led us all into what happened next for the Detroit Lions leading into 2022, and that's HBO Hard Knocks. All fans across the country and definitely Lions fans tuned in every week to see a little bit more of the Detroit Lions. What was happening between MC/DC, Deuce Staley, Aaron Glenn, and such. We got to see Aiden Hutchinson break it down for us on stage in front of his teammates, singing Billie Jean, giving out his version of Michael Jackson's classic. And every week, Lions fans were captivated more and more into tuning into this. We got to see the team being prepared for the preseason games. We got to see them go through a game or two, and some of the personalities that were starting to emerge. While a lot of questions centered around why aren't we seeing any of Jared Goff, it is what it is. The producers couldn't fit everything in, but by the end of HBO Hard Knocks' run, we knew this. Aiden Hutchinson had arrived. Malcolm Rodriguez had become a budding star, at least in the eyes of the media, and you could see small snippets here and there of pieces of personality in the coaching staff, the players, and the potential this team had for the actual season coming up. Well, let's skip ahead into the actual NFL season. Here we go, week 1. Detroit at home against preseason picked favorites, Philadelphia. Jalen Hurts and the gang came into town, and what do you know? It was all the game anybody expected it to be, and maybe a little bit more. The game throughout, very close until the third quarter, where Philadelphia eventually breaks it open to a 17-point lead. Things look grim until in the fourth quarter, the Lions mount a comeback and get it down to just 3 points with roughly 2 minutes and 40 seconds left. The Lions force a fourth and inches situation with under 2 minutes to go, and unfortunately, the Lions were not able to get the ball back. Philadelphia was able to run out the clock, but what Lions fans took from that is this team's got some real potential. You just went toe-to-toe with one of the best teams in all the NFL, and in a game of inches, unfortunately, you came up just inches short, and that would take us into Game 2 at Washington. Let me correct one thing. I believe I just said at Washington. The game was in Detroit, but it was against Washington. And the Lions came out like a buzzsaw early in the game, just steamrolling, cutting through the Commanders left and right, forcing a safety in the end zone, just trick play after trick play. DeAndre Swift busting open a big, long 50-yard run. Amon-Ra St. Brown coming on a handoff play around the edge, getting a key first down. And the Lions late in the game do have to hold off a bit of a Commanders comeback, but they earned that big win. And that takes us into our matchup at Minnesota, where I think most Lions fans know we controlled the game throughout, but ultimately in the end, in a miscommunication play on a key fourth quarter drive by the Vikings, allowed them to get out of town, or get us out of town on the wrong side of that scoreboard, and allowed Minnesota to pick up another close win, something they would see throughout the season. And then the dark times come for the season. I'm sure you guys all know this, but it is what it is. The Lions rip off, unfortunately, in the wrong way, a 5-game streak where nothing seems to go their way. From the game at home against Seattle, where we scored over 40 points and lost, the defense couldn't even force a punt that game. It just game in, game out, something just seemed like same old Lions. Breaks not going our way, injuries popping up left and right, chatter of are we going to have the number 1 pick in next year's draft. All these things laid in to one another, including the bye. But then in the bye, something seemed to change. We had Pascal finally make his appearance in Dallas, as you could see the promise from this rookie right off the bat. You could see Kirby Joseph, due to injury, starting to get more reps and starting to emerge, forcing a fumble. You saw Malcolm Rodriguez be asked to do a little bit more in pass coverage, and he didn't do a horrible job. Jeff Okudah perhaps played his best game of the season, looking more like, a hammering Hank out there, in that he was just smashing into people left and right. It's also why I think he should get moved to safety, as he had a monster of a game, smashing into running backs, busting up passes, etc., etc. And while the Lions lost, something did change. The Lions did keep losing throughout the season until, on an unexpected game, the Green Bay Packers came to town. I think, like most people, we expected the Lions to lose. We expected Aaron Rodgers to do what Aaron Rodgers has done for over a decade. Carve up the secondary, score points with ease, point at us, look very confident and in command. But then, as the Packers drove early in the game and get into the red zone on a fourth down play, fourth and just a yard and a half to go, Aaron Rodgers drops back to pass, and what do you know? Aiden Hutchinson read it, slipped it, and picked it off in the end zone. From there, both teams went back and forth, but I'm sure you guys all know the story. Rodgers would be picked off 2 more times by Kirby Joseph, that budding rookie we mentioned. Malcolm Rodriguez made a number of plays, and while James Houston still had not yet emerged, Joshua Pascal did start getting some pressures and hits on Rodgers along with Hutchinson. And by the end of the game, the NFL world was stunned. Jared Goff had played not a great game, but a good game. TJ Hockenson was already gone. This was his first game gone. But the Lions had found a way to band together, keep Rodgers in check, and get a win that nobody saw coming. Give them just their second win of the year. From there, it was just week in, week out, game in, game out. But the game in Chicago really started to build momentum for the Lions. Justin Fields had emerged just weeks before as the superstar running quarterback, as his new coach had found ways to scheme into some of his strengths while negating some of his weaknesses. And when it looked very bleak in the fourth quarter, the Lions down a ton, Jeff Okudah pulled off a pick six and taking the ball into the end zone. The Lions offense had come together to score late where Jared Goff had left a very precise drive down the field. And at the end of the day, it wasn't the bad guys being the heroes. It was the Lions on the right side of a 1-point score game. And what do you know, all of a sudden, Lady Momentum started showing up on the Lions sideline with a second straight win. So back and forth over the rest of the season, the Lions ended up finishing the year, I'm sure you all know, with 8 wins and just 2 losses over the final stretch of the season. Those losses did come on Thanksgiving on a field goal game, against the Buffalo Bills. And then unfortunately the game down in Carolina, everybody has a bad game sometimes, and that was definitely our bad game. The Lions ended the season, though, by posting a huge win on the road in the cold, frozen tundra, Sunday Night Football against, once again, Aaron Rodgers and the boys, where the Lions did something that nobody saw coming. With no reason to play, they had every reason to play to make sure if we couldn't get in the playoffs, neither could Aaron Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers. And this included an impressive drive late in the game where the Lions, on 4th and 1, said, you know what, instead of kicking a field goal and being up 7 and giving Rodgers a chance to mount a comeback, we're going to go for the win. In an empty back scenario where clearly the Lions could only pass, they dropped back and Goff hit DJ Shark over the center of the field. First down, game over, goodbye Aaron Rodgers. And it could be possibly the last time the Lions face him in a Packer uniform. All right, now let's start talking about the players now that we got the kind of brief season recap out of the way. Let's start with the quarterback, Jared Goff. Kind of by everybody viewed as a throw-in with the Matthew Stafford trade. And last year, his first year, 2021 in Detroit, let's be fair, the first 75% of the season, what would you have to say about him? There was not much there other than, he's a bridge quarterback. But then there was a change in offensive coordinators. Ben Johnson, along with MCDC, more or less take control of the offense and the play calling. What do you know? Amon-Ra St. Brown starts getting more reps in as a starting wide receiver. Josh Reynolds, who was released by the Tennessee Titans, is snagged up. And somebody that we've talked about before is very friendly and familiar with Goff. And at that point, the offense starts showing some real signs of strength. Goff becomes the number 4 quarterback in all the league, just over those games, and he continues that play into the preseason. In fact, to the point, we hear from multiple outlets, reviewers of the Lions, that Goff in preseason warm-ups, it looks great. We're only allowed to see him for 2 drives in all the preseason, and to be fair, he looked very good in that time. But then the regular season came, and we started getting snippets here and there of his potential. What you all wanted to know as Lions fans, is this just, fake or is it real? I'd say this, by the end of the season, we knew it was real. Whether or not it was the play calling, just the offensive line, the receivers around him, whatever it was, Jared Goff throughout the season kept looking better and better and better. Yes, there was about a 3-game stretch starting with Dallas and then went on for a bit. Excuse me, let me take that back. Starting with New England, going into Dallas after the bye, and a couple of games after that, where Goff did not look great. But I think if we all take a moment of pause and look back, those games were largely not great for the Detroit Lions quarterback nor its offense, because virtually all the starting wide receivers were either out or banged up. Tom Kennedy, Khalif Raymond, etc. did a great job with what they had as far as opportunities-wise. But let's also be fair. If those are your starting wide receivers still going against the other team's top defense, there's a reason why those guys are lower on the depth chart and on your practice squad. They're just not the same level as the guys you had out there prior. All right, moving on to the running backs. Well, the season started with a bang, with DeAndre Swift having a huge 50-yard run against the Eagles and then another one against Washington. Injuries set in. And one thing we've seen with Swift more and more throughout his career, it's just an inability to be available. Injuries seem to hit him hard and something he struggled with throughout most of the season. But instead of just being focused on a singular back, what did change with those injuries is Jamal Williams started emerging along with Jackson, Craig Reynolds, etc. You saw a shuffling of backs in and out, and it probably ultimately led to all of them having more success. Will we still end up having to draft somebody next year or sign somebody in free agency? That remains to be seen. But what Detroit did do is have one of the best running back by community groups in all the NFL. Jamal Williams breaks a 2-3 decade old record of Barry Sanders for 16 rushing touchdowns in a season. Yes, Barry did that in a 16-game season, where Williams broke it, pushing the record to 17 in a 17-game season. Whatever it is, though, he did something nobody else has done since Sanders, and it's proved that Detroit, in the running game around the end zone, has a real good chance to get into the end zone. All right, moving on to the tight ends now. Came into the season, T.J. Hockenson was a Pro Bowl tight end for Detroit that was known for having some big games here and there, then kind of disappearing at times for other games. It is what it is. Hockenson, along with the Detroit Lions offense, came out and lit up many a team throughout the season. But when the most wide receivers were banged up around the sidelines, be fair to Hockenson, he had one of his best career games ever against Seattle, where it seemed like every time he caught the ball, he was running for 40 to 50 to 60 yards, getting into scoring position, helping the Detroit Lions come back from down 20 points to get to where they were only down 3 points late in the game. Unfortunately, the defense could not force a single punt throughout that game. But something was brewing even before that between T.J. Hockenson and the coaching staff. Simply put, they weren't running as many routes specifically designed to him. Miscommunications between Hawk and Goff led to 3, arguably 4, of Goff's 5 interceptions at that point in the season before, as we all know, spoiler alert, T.J. Hockenson was traded. Why he was traded is up for debate, but what we can say about the tight ends after the trade is something really did change. Detroit Lions tight ends prior to Hockenson's trade were ranked as among the NFL's worst in run blocking. Also, the amount of turnovers that came in results throws to tight ends were among the NFL's highest. We can all debate why those factors are, but those are the facts at that time. After the trade, though, things flip-flopped. The Lions went to 0 turnovers regarding tight end play, and they became one of the league's best at run blocking through tight ends. So a complete flip of the script from both those metrics, and guys that most of us had never heard of started emerging, whether it be Zane Zylstra, Mitchell, or Brock Wright. All of a sudden, the Lions started relying on 3, sometimes 4 tight ends to fill the void of T.J. Hockenson. And at the end of the season, what we can say in all fairness to all parties is the Lions' production from the tight end position nearly tripled, while the run blocking improved by over a factor of 2. How about that? We'll go with that. But it is what it is. Hockenson went on to greener pastures. The Lions gained more production on the tight end play after that, and the Lions picked up another second-round pick. Something Brad Holmes seems focused on is constantly getting more and more picks for the future drafts. All right, now moving on to the offensive line. What came out at the preseason looking like Detroit may have the greatest offensive line since maybe the Cowboys of the 90s. We had road graders in the middle with Haloti Halivatai. I probably did mispronounce that name, but I gave it a shot. You also had Frank Ragnow, Decker back, Joan Jackson back, and obviously the stud, Penei Sewell. But then, just 4 days before the season opener, Vatai has another back injury that's going to keep him out. At that point, it was hoped just for a few games, but unfortunately, the back injury resulted with issues with the spine. He had to have surgery, and his career is in question. I think that'd be fair to say at this point. Frank Ragnow, who just the year prior got shut down a few games in because of turf toe and surgery around that kept him out. He battled through it throughout the season, often not being able to practice on Wednesdays or Thursdays, sometimes even Fridays, just so he can make a game of it on Sundays. Decker and Sewell were just studs throughout the season. You heard me talk on Lions Talk Live many times. I thought this was the best season by Decker in his career, and that's saying something because he's had some decent seasons. Sewell just continues his upward trend, but the foundation is here for the Lions to have a very bright offensive line for years to come. Evan Brown, who had replaced Frank Ragnow the season prior when we gained him off the Texans practice squad, who did an admirable job as a center a year ago, was asked to more or less move over and become the right starting guard. And while you've heard me debate throughout the season how great I think Evan Brown is or is not, I will say this: he's great in pass blocking, not great in run blocking. Tommy Kramer, who probably should have been the starting right guard once Vaitai went down, lost for the season with another injury issue that kept him out. So the Lions overcame a number of injury issues, had to use Dan Skipper for the first time ever on the offensive line, etc., etc. As the guard situation got bad at times, but they found a way to band together, right the ship, and by season's end, it'd be hard to argue who had a better offensive line than the Detroit Lions. All right, now we're going to switch to defense. And with the defense, we're going to start with the defensive line. Obviously, Aiden Hutchinson is just off the charts better than probably most people anticipated from a rookie end. With setting a record with 3 interceptions by an end ever. And let's make it, some notes here. This guy had never had a interception in high school, middle school, little school, or college. But yet he comes in the NFL and has 3. Don't explain that to me. It just is what it is. Then he has 9.5 sacks, and including one game against Washington, we had 3 sacks and a half. Team record, by the way. So what we can say about him is he's everything probably any Lions fan could have cautiously hoped for from the number 2 overall pick. You saw Lee McNeil and Buggs continue to emerge at the defensive tackle spot. Yes, the Lions may still look to add more to this in the offseason, but for now, we can say this: Lee McNeil is continuing an upward trend, and his future looks incredibly bright. Buggs, somebody who just clogs up the hole and helps out. I'll say this: while he might not always pack a stat sheet, his presence in the locker room, to me, is invaluable. He became a leader and a galvanizer of this team, especially the defense, when it was down in the dirt, and helped it achieve new levels. Joshua Pascal, I get the rookie, didn't play the first part of the year and then had another knee injury, just past the middle portion of the season. But he came on, and towards the end of the season, you could see him not only being highly effective, as he was out of college, against the run, but starting to generate some real pass rush, including his 2-sack performance against the Chicago Bears in Ford Field. You saw Romeo Okwara come back from Achilles injury to put up a number of sacks and help us out. And then, of course, let's also mention John Kaminsky, somebody who was cut by Atlanta, left for dead on the scrap heaps, but Lions coaching staffs found him, brought him in, and got real value out of this guy. Early in the season when he got hurt against Washington, towards the end of the play, in fact, I think it might have actually been the very last play of the game, he missed a couple games, and you could see where his presence was sorely missed out there by the defense. Now, let's talk about the other big one in the room, the one that nobody saw coming. I don't care who you were, but a superstar in the budding, and that's James Houston. And Houston's presence, just another big win for this team. As you already talked about, a number of rookies stood out. This perhaps is the greatest rookie class in Detroit Lions history, other than maybe you could say maybe the 80s, I think it's 85 or 86 draft class, because that is fairly similar to this one. But Houston just added another layer to this defensive front. And the problem is going to be for the Detroit Lions coaching staff is figuring out how to get all these guys on the field. Somebody's going to have to move the linebacker, and I'll let them worry about that this offseason. But you get the idea. That defensive front for Detroit, it's not complete yet, but you got a lot of parts that everybody in the Lions fandom could say by the end of the season, that defensive line's looking pretty good. Now, let's move on to the linebackers. So let me give you this. If we could say at the start of the year, your 6th round pick would be cut after the preseason, put on the practice squad, removed from the practice squad to make room for somebody else due to injuries, and then picked back up, doesn't get a start doesn't get playing time in an NFL game until the Thanksgiving Day game, you'd be like, this guy's so average, average practice squad body. James Houston had other ideas, and little did anybody who didn't already know about the problem and study the problem when he was in college. Nobody saw this coming, but the Buffalo Bills definitely figured out they needed 2 guys to block him quickly. James Houston, in his very first NFL action, got 5 total snaps against the Bills. In those 5 total snaps, the dude had 2 sacks. And while everybody probably wrote it off as some sort of anomaly, nobody knew what to make of it, the following week, he did it again. While he didn't get 2 sacks, he did get 1, but let's just move this forward. I think you get the idea. By the end of the season in Green Bay, this guy wasn't just a third down specialist, but he was getting starting reps. He was on first, second, and third down. And yes, he is going to have to work on block run shedding so he can help out the running game more. But the problem ended up the year with 8 sacks. Well, we've already talked about Rodrigo a little bit, and how he rose to fame through Hard Knocks in part. Let's also be fair. He wasn't just somebody you would talk about and say, hey, he's a byproduct of media. He does not really good. He played incredibly well. And while Alex Anzalone, his play also probably superseded really anything any Lions fan could have anticipated throughout the year. The two of them kept playing slightly better and better and better. Why, I think it would be fair to say neither one of them were ever superstars and things. It doesn't mean they didn't make super plays at time to time. They both have faults. They're not, complete players, but they kept showing promise more and more, especially with Malcolm Rodriguez, a rookie. He came in out of the 6th round and just made a splash from day one. Like Houston, a late round pick, nobody expected to be in a position to start, but somebody who took advantage of opportunity when opportunity knocked. Anzalone, we pretty much knew what we were going to have with him this year, and he did play a little bit above what I felt he did last year, which was solid. Not great, but solid. Derek Barnes had times where he rose, and the former 3rd round pick looked like somebody the Lions might be able to build on in the future should injuries occur to this position. He showed some real promise, and if he continues that upward trend, he'll be pushing for a larger role come 2023. All right, now let's go into the secondary. So here's what we can say. Coming into the season, I think if you ask most Lions fans, out of the safeties and corners, who's Detroit's best player? You probably would have said Walker. And Tracy Walker, a very phenomenal player for the Detroit Lions, is good. Is he great? No, but he's not bad. Unfortunately, disaster struck for Tracy Walker, early in the 2nd quarter of the Lions' loss at Minnesota, where he tore his Achilles tendon. So he's going to be out and looking to rehab. Hopefully he can be back for the start of next season, but he'll be back when he's back. But again, like we talked about with Derek Barnes and the linebackers, taking advantage of opportunity when opportunity knocks, that opened the door for Kirby Joseph to start getting on the field. And the thing probably nobody anticipated happening this early in his career is Kirby Joseph came to play, forcing turnovers, either through forced fumbles against Dallas, against Green Bay, let alone picking off 4 passes. Not the top out of the rookie class throughout the NFL, but real close to the top. He picked off Aaron Rodgers, a record 3 times, and nobody's done that in one season. Although, yes, I am aware Brian Urlacher did pick him off 3 times in Urlacher's career. Some other good notes and opportunities for Lions players. is we saw Jerry Jacobs return from an ACL injury to perform once again at a very high level. The former undrafted free agent signing by the Lions even earned starts later in the year and slid over when Okudah became injured for the last game of the season to become Detroit's number 1 corner. Maybe not an ideal position for him, but let's be fair when ranking him, he's done well this season. He needs to take it to another level in 2023, but for a guy who's played 1 year in the NFL prior to this season, I think you see a lot of promise out of him. I won't get into each of the corners in the room or each of the safeties, but I think you get the gist. Kirby Joseph is looking like a real superstar. Deshaun Elliott looks very stable, and Tracy Walker, if he returns healthy, gives the Lions some nice depth. Who will start? We'll let the coaches figure that out next year. The cornerback position, though, is one that, in my opinion, the Lions will have to look to address hard, either through free agency or the draft in 2023. Probably the other big surprise out of the secondary position was the play of Jeff Okudah. As a rookie and playing injured throughout that rookie season, he showed a couple moments of promise, a lot of moments of learning opportunity for the young cornerback. And then disaster struck for him, as we all know, in 2021, the very first game of the season against the 49ers. Deebo Samuel took him deep. He ran with him, but then all of a sudden fell to the ground on Ford Field turf. Came down with a torn Achilles, and while he did come back this year, he showed him a lot of great strengths, a lot of great improvement throughout the season, but unfortunately, the last 3 games of the season, whether it was because of injury, illness, or whatever it may be, he tended to trail off and down. Amani Oruwariye, who was considered a near Pro Bowl corner just the year before in 2021, fell off the map. Couldn't guard anybody without getting a flag, and that was quite literally the case in our first matchup against the Vikings, where Amani Oruwariye, I don't know if this is an NFL record, was flagged 7 times. 6 of them were accepted. That's too much for one person to do. Whatever happened to him, I don't know, but I can say this, you've probably seen his last moments in Detroit Lions uniform. Coaching staff, I'll kind of speed through this because this video is already 300 times longer than I wanted it to be. Dan Campbell, we talked about it on the Lions Talk Live from the start of the year, whether it's Campbell, Aaron Glenn, or whoever. These guys were incredibly inexperienced. All of them in their positions had a maximum of 1 year of experience prior to the season. Ben Johnson, who's the hottest commodity out of the Detroit Lions assistance program since the 70s, let's be fair. But whatever it may be, they all went through moments where they had to learn. They had to grow. And what we can say is, yes, did it cost us some games early in the year? 100%. Well, they did all grow. They did get better. And the product we saw from the coaching staff by the end of the season is when I think all Detroit Lions fans could look at and say, yeah, we're going in the right direction. I believe in this person's ability. Hopefully they all return next year. If not, I do believe the pieces are set up for the Detroit Lions to find other personnel to come in to those positions and keep us going on the right path. All right, we're going to talk about the kickers and punters real quick here. Jeff Fox is a stud. I don't care what anybody says. He's got one of the biggest legs in all the NFL, and he is, check it out stat-wise, the most accurate passer from the punter spot the NFL has seen in the last 23 years. Yeah, I had to do a little research to find that one, but nobody completes passes at a higher percentage as a punter than that man right there. Lions ended a revolving door at kicker throughout the season as Michael Badgley came in just before halfway throughout the season and brought stability to this position that we hadn't seen since, really the start of the year, where we went through kicker after kicker after kicker after kicker. Whatever it is, though, I'll summarize the special teams with that. They outperformed probably most expectations, especially when he came into how many 4th down conversion passes or runs we got on punts throughout the season. So give a lot of shout out to Fox with that. All right, well, I'm not going to dive in any more to this. There's your recap. If you're probably just driving around or listening in the background, this is probably one of those videos that's okay to play. Sorry that it's so long, but I try to give just due to every aspect of the 2022 season. I'll say this, as somebody who's coached and been a general manager in pro sports and all that stuff, I think the Lions are hitting on all cylinders right now. But I'll leave everybody with this. truest thing I've learned in sports. What you did yesterday has zero impact on tomorrow. So they're going to have to come out in this next offseason. They're going to have to do well in free agency, the draft, and then obviously, just July workouts, etc. Get ready for that preseason and then the season. Because next season, I will say this, if they can keep some of those momentum going while remaining fairly healthy, drafting well, and the players all still banding together like they appear to, and real brotherly love that this team appears to have, then I'm going to stick with what I put out earlier this year. If you want to go back and check out the videos, I called for 2023, the Lions to make the playoffs, win a playoff game. 2024, the Lions are going to the Super Bowl. Let's see what shakes out. But if you haven't yet subscribed to Lions Talk Live, please consider doing so. If not, we'll see you all tomorrow on another Lions Talk Live.